In section 4.4 in the video notes, we're going to be looking at part A, the zero factor property. So the zero factor property says that if A times B is equal to 0, then, so the only way to multiply to 0 is with 0 times something. If you have two non-zero numbers, they're not going to multiply to 0. So one of the numbers has to be 0. So the result is that either A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0. Doesn't matter which one, they could both be 0 and this would be true, right? So A equals 0 or B equals 0. If either one of those equals 0, then the whole thing becomes true. The product is 0. That's a zero factor property. So we use this property to solve a polynomial equation by factoring, because if the equation is set equal to 0 and we factor it, we're creating that product. Then we can separate the factors and set each factor equal to 0. Then we can solve those linear pieces and get our solutions. So we're going to look at two examples right here of the zero factor property. It's going to give us a chance to practice our factoring again as well. Okay. The first thing is it has to be equal to 0, right? The zero factor property, there are lots and lots of ways to multiply to non-zero numbers, but the only way to multiply to 0 is with the zero factor property. If one of the numbers has to be 0. So first of all, we're going to subtract the 7x from both sides, and we're going to add the 10 to both sides. So we're just going to move those over to the other side to get this equal to 0. That'll be x squared minus 7x plus 10 equals 0. All right? Now I can begin factoring. I've got equal to 0. I'm going to write it in factored form. Okay, so I'm looking for, I've got 10. It is positive, so I know that I need either two positives or two negatives. And because the 7 is negative, I'm going for those two negatives. So let's see. Let's try negative 2 and negative 5. And that equals negative 7. That's the pair we want. So we're going to be able to factor this. This is the 8 equals 1 type of factoring. So I've got x minus 2 times x minus 5 equals 0. Okay, and then just I like to draw my line so I've got some factoring work down there. So this equation goes down to this equation, and I have my factoring divide breakout working there in the middle. All right. Now, we have our product. It's written in factored form, so we're going to separate the factors, setting each factor to be 0. This is true if either the first part of the product equals 0. It's also true if the second part of the product equals 0. So we separate and say that this would be true if x minus 2 equals 0, and it will also be true if x minus 5 equals 0. So we separate, set each factor equal to 0, and solve. So we're going to add the 2 over, and add the 5 over. So that will give us x equals 2, and this will give us x equals 5. So there are two answers. This is true if x is equal to 2. It's also true if x is equal to 5. Oftentimes, for short, we might just write x equals 2, 5 as well. It's a shorter way. You don't have to write the x twice, but you're solving a problem. You already have it written twice. You don't need to rewrite it as 1x as well. Okay, so look at the second part. I need to get this equal to 0. This looked so nice because it was already factored, but unfortunately, it's not equal to 0. So we're going to have to distribute that, rearrange it, move this to the other side, get it equal to 0. Let's start. So I have 4 times 2 is 8, x squared, 4x times 3, that's negative 12x. 1 times 2, that's negative 2x. Negative 1, negative 3, that's positive 3, equals 3. Okay. So 8x squared, those are both negative, so negative 14x plus 3 equals 3. All right. So the next step here will be getting it equal to 0, so we're going to subtract this 3 from both sides. So we'll have 8x squared minus 14x. That happened to be a 3 as well. Sometimes it's not. That worked out to be 0, so I don't have to write anything there. Equals 0. Okay. Out of all of our factoring strategies for this one, it has two terms. And they're not squares, but they do both have something in common. They both have x and 2 in common, so we're going to start with the greatest common factor. So we're going to factor out 2x That leaves us with 4x minus 2 divided into 14 gives us 7. Okay, so they're not both in parentheses this time, but this is still a product, 2x times 4x minus 7, and so I'm still using the zero factor property right here. Set 2x equal to 0, also set 4x minus 7 equal to 0. Those are both parts of this product. If 2x is equal to 0, divide both sides by 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. For the other one, add 7. 4x equals 7. 0 plus 7 is 7. And divide by 4. X equals 7/4. So for this one, since they're not on the same line, easy to circle together, I would rewrite x equals 0 and 7/4. The most important thing to remember when using the zero factor property is that all factoring strategies apply. You might get to do an A equals 1 factor type. You might get to do factoring by grouping. You might get to do GCF factoring. You might get to do factoring when A is not equal to 1 using either trial by error or the AC method. All factoring strategies can be used.